pleasure to be with you. I'm Sopo, I'm based in Tbilisi. I live here and I work from here, and I work for Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Lab, and it's DFRLab. And what we do basically is to identify, expose, and explain disinformation, and not only disinformation, but broadly information influence operations. So a couple of words about me. This is my contact information if you want to exchange your thoughts, or I don't know, be friends on Facebook and Twitter. I also work for Zinc Network. This is a British company, and they are running a major disinformation, counter-disinformation program in Georgia that is called Georgia Information Integrity Program, and I'm doing disinformation research there as well. And also I'm teaching at University of Georgia fact-checking and verification of information, and also disinformation research and analysis. So this is basically a couple of words about me. So we're going to talk today and have conversation about open source. And what is an open source? Open source may come in the form of an image, and this type of images that circulates and disseminates on Facebook or social networks or in open source, it's really very helpful for us to identify some of the connections between malign actors. And for instance, on this picture you see on the left side, there is a far-right pro-Kremlin businessman in Georgia, but now he lives in Russia. This is Levan Vasadze, and he's the main ideologist of far-right groups in Georgia. And then on the right side, you see Alexander Dugin, who is also very frequently referred to as Putin's brain. And basically the context here about this image is that the far-right groups in Georgia, they sometimes deny their links with Russia. They're not really very open about that, and this type of images, footage, video, and that type of content helps us to identify the connections, that they are connected with each other and somehow share, I don't know, ideology or anything. Open source is also the satellite images, and in DFRLab we're using satellite images very frequently to identify and verify the locations of the footage, and this is also an open source. Of course, there are some of the paid resources, but this is an open, so Google Earth and Google Maps is really very open to everyone, and frequently in the sessions we're using Google Earth because it's open, it's free. Open source is also the Facebook posts. And not only the Facebook post, but also the comments section, because you see like who interacts in the post, and also the shares button. If you click here on the shares, you can see like who shared that information, and sometimes you might find interesting persons there. And this is how we try to identify coordinated inauthentic behavior on Facebook, and we will be talking about that later as well. And this is also the open source, but of course that varies according to country and according to legislation, and sometimes it's different legislation. But in Georgia, basically, you can access every information about the person and the property the properties, the ownerships, or donations to the Georgian political parties or the companies participating in tenders, procurement. And in Georgian case, this is public information and accessible for everyone, so this is an open source. So what we are doing basically, this is OSINT, this is open source intelligence, and to sum up this intro slides, this means that open source is an information that can be legally gathered from free public spaces, sources, yeah. And what are the advantages? So the first thing is that it's transparent and it is accessible for everyone. And also you can replicate the process of verification. So there is connection between the researcher, the author of the article or publication, and the reader who reads the publication. So everyone can access that, and basically good counter-disinformation article or fact-checking article or analysis should contain the links to the primary sources so the reader can do the process himself or herself. It's not classified, as we said, it's legally gathered. And also, if you do some simple training, everyone is able to analyze open source and open source data. So let's now delve into some of the cases from DFRLab's history. And the major process here, like the first steps of verification is doing image verification to understand what is the disinformation method, or what is the disinformation narrative. And the image verification through open sources is considered as a mean to debunk disinformation. So this happened in 2017. It was 5 days before Germany's parliamentary election, and AfD, Alternative für Deutschland, that is anti-migrant political party, they published this photo, with the caption, "Do you remember New Year's Eve? Go and vote." And what was the context of New Year's Eve? If you remember, there were some series of sexual assaults on New Year's Eve 2015 and 16. And of course, when this first image was published, it was reshared on Facebook with some more inflammatory language, and multiple anti-migrant or xenophobic or far-right pages also reshared this image. But then Google reverse image search and image verification exposed that this photo, this one, the original one, was photoshopped on multiple layers. So the background was also photoshopped, and the person, the face of the person was also replaced. So initially the background was from footage from 2011. It depicted Lara Logan, the journalist of CBS News, and she was assaulted on Tahrir Square. And then the image, the face of the woman was of British glamour model. And doing like this type of alteration, anti-migrant political party posted disinformation, fake image, to galvanize voters and mobilize voters. And that was also a demonstration how malign actors tried to capitalize on migration crisis and sentiments around migration crisis. To continue about the images, so that was the case when we track images and the primary sources of the images and origins of the images to track this information. But also image verification helps us to expose some suspicious accounts on social media networks. And here we have like two options, how they are doing that and how they are using images. First is that they steal images from Google or from other persons, and also sometimes they use artificially generated images. And why they do need that? Because we mostly trust those persons who look like real profiles and not the profiles who are empty and they do not have any identification information on their profiles. So this is basically the major tools what we are using for image verification. This one, the InVid, I don't have laser here, but I'll show here. The InVid and Revi reverse image search, they are browser extensions, very, very easy to use. And you do not need really to download additional program to use those resources. And then others are Yandex image, reverse, this is TNI and Google images. So these are reverse image searches that helps us to identify the origin of the photo. And in case of InVid also, you can upload the video, it gives you the keyframes, and then you can go and do the image verification about the keyframes. So one example from Georgian political context, this was the profile named Tata, and Tata is a very common Georgian name for female. And she was posting about the politics and elections. It was like 2 years ago, ahead of parliamentary elections, 2020, 1 year ago, sorry. And when we do image verification, and mostly in Georgian context, we are using Yandex images. Why? Because there is tendency that they are using the photos of from Russian social networks, and Yandex is very helpful in that process. And we see that there is one person, and we see like Instagram profile of that person, and this is case that this is not AI generated image, this is the real image of real person, and someone, Tata, is using the image from Instagram. Another one, Mariam, again the common name. Again, we see that in Google, it was taken from Google. And what we pay attention to as well is the discrepancy between this name, what we see on the screen in the name, and also in the URL. For instance, here we see that Mariam is her name, but in the URL there is Nika, and Nika is male name in Georgia. So like, is he Nika or is she Mariam? So that's suspicious, of course, and these are the details we pay attention to. All of these are open sources, so even like on Facebook posts, if it's restricted to friends or, I don't know, close friends, of course it's not an open source, but if it's public, we can analyze that. And then about the images, the suspicious account also use artificially generated images, and this is meme we are using in our sessions. I don't know if it's funny, but on the internet, nobody knows that you're not a dog, but a deep fake. So these are like two machine learning algorithms fed with the cases, and in this case of the images, and one detects fake faces, another one creates fake faces, and this is how they do their job. So now I want your interaction here. I will show two. Like on 3 slides, we will have images of real person and fake person. And also, let's wait for the answers from our online audience. And the question here is that, like, which one is real person? The left one or the right one? Okay, just like 1 minute, maybe our online audience puts the answers in the chat, and then we can analyze. Do we have some answers?
Hold on for a second.
But you should also explain, like, why do you think, like, which one? You should not guess, just you need rational answer here.
There's silence so far.
Silence. Okay. Who thinks that the real person is that woman? Can you raise the hands? So she's the real one.
So
The real one. Okay.
2 people say left is real.
Left is real.
In Zoom.
Okay. In audience, who thinks that the left is real? Okay. The majority thinks that the left is real. That's correct. But, like, do you want to share your ideas or opinion, like why she's fake? Okay, like any of you. What is copied, sorry? Eyes are copied, okay. So, okay. Okay. Other markers? Yes. This side, right? Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, on the screen, right? It's not natural. Yes. So why we are detecting this type of markers on the images? Because you cannot really do the reverse image search of the photos that are created artificially, because they are generated automatically and they are not stored anywhere in open source. So the only chance, well, if you know the tech stuff, and I'm not the tech person to identify this, like with the programs or something, you need to identify the details on the image that is given here. So these are like round pixels. Do you see here? These are the signs that they are created artificially. And also you should pay attention to the edges between the hair and the skin. And somehow you see that they are mixed with each other. It's not like separate thing. I don't know, it's not natural hair. And these are the part of the signs we're paying attention to. Then we will see other examples as well. Okay, the same. Which one is real? Okay, who thinks that the girl or woman, I don't know, is real? Okay. Who thinks that the boy is real? Again, the majority. Correct, this is real person. And why do you think that she's fake? Any other?
Yeah, on the left side of her face, the hair mixes with the...
Exactly.
With her face.
Yes, here. Okay.
Yeah. There's also something wrong with her left eye, I think, like from my perspective.
Okay.
Yeah, there's on the neck, there's some kind of weird transition going on there.
Yeah, this one.
Yep.
Oh, yeah. This seems to be like a blouse or jacket or something, and this one has the same color that this one, but it's not symmetrical, right? If you see asymmetry on the images, that's also the sign of the fake image. Any other details you identified here on the image? Teeth? They're weird. Okay. Yeah, exactly. And also, is she a young girl or a woman? It's also a word, right? She looks like a young girl, but she also has wrinkles, and this is not natural as well. And also pay attention to additional objects. Like this should be the person, but this looks like a monster like next to her. I don't know what's wrong with her. And pay attention to the backgrounds. Here we see additional object, right? This is spoon and the plate, and everything is very clear. And we also see some of the writings, and it's really hard for AI to identify these types of details. So pay attention to the backgrounds as well. And the last one, it's a bit more complicated, but I'm sure you will figure that out. You can come closer if you need. Let me check the time.
Yeah, may I try? The man's ear.
So the man is fake. Everyone believes that man is fake. Okay, good job. Yes.
Yeah,
Why?
because look at the ears. I mean, the size are really different.
Yeah, it's a bit.
Something is wrong.
Yeah. Okay, something's wrong. What's wrong?
Also, the eyes. They are different too. The light inside of the eye.
Yeah. And we see that type of. It's called in tech language perturbation. You should know, right? Perturbation or something like that. But I'm calling that pixels because that's a really complicated word for me. Up there, like on the edge of the hair and the background, there is something like lightened. So that's that type of pixel. You should need to identify those in the type of images. And again, the background is again clear. It's like a car seat or something like that. And these are the details. Again, the weird stuff with the teeth. And yeah, these are the issues with AI. So this is how we try to track AI images. And in Georgian context, it's not really widely used, but there was one really interesting example how Russia tried to hijack news feed on Instagram. There was protest around Navalny issue, and when doing like geotagging in search, like Red Square, you should have seen the protest. But they posted the picture of the people, and those people were not real persons. They were AI-generated images. So that was artificial process to hijack the hashtag and the information around the protest. So again, let's continue with the open sources and the images and why we love open source. And we have the inside joke there that Russian soldiers love selfies as well. And that helps us to identify their secret military presence as well. And this is the case how we tracked Russian Arctic base solely from social media posts. So the case was that Ministry of Defense of Russia published some of the images of their newly built Arctic base. But the images were very carefully chosen because we were not really able to understand the full picture about the base. We saw this type of images. The main building here, this triangle square with the domes. There were some of the images from interior, and that was also the part of Russian propaganda about their military superiority, and that was the context as well. But then suddenly we saw that on Russian social networks, some of the workers from the Arctic base started to post selfies and images in front of the plan. So now this is the plan that potentially will help us to identify all the objects and buildings in this database. And when Putin, Medvedev, and Sergei Shoigu visited this base, then we saw the increase of images on Russian social networks. And what was good was that some of the people were posing from this side, and that helped us to identify that part of the plan. And some of the people started to post from that side. And this helped to identify the image from here, what was going on. And now if we compare the images, the information, what we seen through open sources, plus the official portrait of the base, now we are able to see the full picture, like what's going on with the database. And now they took the labels from the plan and put on the official images. And also, if we take the imagery from the satellites, now we are able to track the functions of every strategic building here in the database. And now we see not only from surface, but the whole context and whole function of the database as well. Not the database, but the Arctic base, military base as well. Another example, this is also the example of how we're using satellites. There was a Twitter post, not very official source. So it said that Bastion P mobile coastal defense systems were going to Taganrog, from Rostov-on-Don to Taganrog. And Taganrog is located 50 kilometers away from Ukrainian border. So the first thing what we did is to really identify whether they were Bastion P defense coastal system. Oh my God, like defense systems, like weaponry is not really my strong side. So we did this visual comparison, and now like we see that there is matching, right? we can confirm that they're really this type of vehicles. And then in the video, that was the video what was published on Twitter, we see the movement of the vehicle, and they pass one building here. And during the geolocation process, we try to identify some of the interesting details in the footage itself that helps us in the verification process, because like Rostov is a huge city and you cannot identify the location, exact location where these vehicles pass without identifying some of the details. And there we see the banner, like the name of the building or what's located there. This is Yamaha. I don't know if it's clear from your side. And also then there is another sign there. And we started to search like Yamaha centers or Yamaha shops or Yamaha building in Rostov-on-Don. And then Google satellite images have this option of street view. And then you can see like the whole road, like what's going on there. So you compare the images. And we see that they have matched. Then there is also interesting detail there that they turn right in the video itself. So there is roundabout, also the cross, the circle, and in the footage, these vehicles go on the right side. And again, using the Google satellite images and also this Google Street View function, here we see the road signs. And the road signs said that the road to Taganrog is on the right side. So that also, this is how we compare the information given in the open source and also using another open source like Google Satellite Images to verify the footage and exact location. So this was what was going on. There was the footage. You see the pin there. It went to right, and here is Taganrog, located 50 kilometers away from Ukrainian border. Okay, again, your interaction. The first thing when we are doing geolocation is to, we need the skills of matching satellite images with actual images, because sometimes, you see differently when you're looking from the satellite. So what do you think? So there is actual image, and now you need to match which one corresponds to that image. So these two are the screenshots from the Google Maps. And what do you think? B or C matches that image? Do we have activity online?
None.
I think it's B.
Everyone thinks that it's B? Okay, why?
Because if you look at the image C, there's like a huge bridge.
Huge bridge, okay.
Which does not, on the third image right there, the bridge is appears a bit lower. I don't know, that's how I think about it.
So it's higher, and that one is
higher,
lower, yeah, and you can track this
Yeah,
from
there's
this
also
pulse,
much
right?
more greenery in C.
Uh-huh.
There is not much green in the picture we're looking at.
Okay.
And it also looks like London to me, I don't know. In the
Yes, it's London.
B is London. So.
Yeah, it's London. Okay, other details? Yeah, it's wheel here. Exactly. Yeah, these are the details. So on both images, we see these wheels, but the river divides into two streams, and this is horizontal line. And also when doing geolocation, you need to try to identify the location of the photographer, who took the picture or the footage. So if he stands here or she and takes the image of the wheel, and if this one matches that one, then the person should be in the water, and that's illogical. If there is a boat trip or something like that, of course it's possible, but the environment does not really match with this one. So the correct answer is B. And also, shapes. Shapes are really important. And sometimes when you're looking above, it's really hard to identify the shape of the object you're looking on the picture. And these shadows, what you already saw, that there is wheel, and there is shadow of the wheel. Pay attention to the shadows, and that's really very helpful in this process. Okay, another one. Any answers?
So one participant says the upper one.
The upper one. So, okay, interesting.
Can I say?
Other ideas?
Okay, I think that it's F because there are two mountains next to each other in the four picture, and on the F picture also there is.
You mean this
mountains.
one?
Yeah, this part.
And here.
And
okay.
in our upper image there is not two mountain, this kinds of line at all.
Okay, interesting. Other
Um,
markers?
So Zoom says upper one in the right corner.
Upper one. So that one is correct, right? That's the idea from the Zoom audience. Ah, that, yeah. Now I got it. Like, it's like he or she thinks that it's somehow
Shape of
moved.
this bridge.
Shape of the dome.
Shape, it's like
Yes,
rounded, like you see it's
exactly.
round, and up there it's just a line.
Exactly. So the shape of that dome is horizontal, right? And the shape of this dome here is like somehow circled. And this is how you identify that even though the environment really looks like the similar, they're not quite similar because the shape of the dome is the major thing you track and try to match the satellite image. And also, if you pay attention there are some of the objects in the water itself, and it's not visible here on this image. So that's also additional marker here. Okay, now you need to guess the city. I don't know if lights are helpful, but yeah, you could do that. But if you need, you can come closer.
Should we know this city?
Sorry?
Should we know this city?
Yeah. Moscow. Why? Похоже. Why? The ships? Okay. So there is one answer here that here we see the Russian flag. Okay, other ideas maybe from online audience? No, okay. Yeah, that's really good detail. So this is not helpful right here, but generally we're looking at the plates of the cars to identify the possible country or state as well. But it's not helpful here. It's covered. This is image from the Google Street View, and the plate is covered. Yeah, exactly. Do you see the Eiffel Tower? It's Paris. It's not Moscow. Here, like, do you see it right now? Yeah. So this is the main process with the verification of the images and footage is that like we're paying attention to the first thing that comes up in the footage, but we need to go beyond that one. So if we say that there is, for example, that this image is disseminated on Facebook and online sources, and there is a demonstration, for instance, and someone says that this is in Moscow, then we are able to verify the location and say that no, this is not in Moscow, this is in Paris, because we see some of the parts of the Eiffel Tower here. So this is how we pay attention to the details. Okay, this one, and we're done with the exercises. What's the city? Can't hear you. Muslim country, okay. Of course, you need to pay attention to the architecture and the style, and we see the mosque. But like Muslim countries are a lot, and in Christian countries, if we can divide the countries in that categories, there are many, many mosques.
It's probably Cairo.
Cairo?
Yes.
Cairo. Why?
Because of pyramids.
Yeah, the shadows of the pyramids. Did everyone see that here? So the shapes of the pyramids, and again, the details that are not really visible initially, but when you pay attention, then you see this one as well. Okay, now let's switch to social media and basically Facebook, because one of the primary tasks or jobs at DFRLab is to track coordinated inauthentic behavior on Facebook. And have you heard this term? Or have you had experience of doing that kind of research? That's really very engaging and interesting for me personally. So what is coordinated inauthentic behavior? This is use of multiple Facebook accounts like pages, groups, profiles, and in some cases those profiles might be fake accounts, and they're using, like, someone who is behind this network is using this infrastructure on Facebook to promote their content. So the basic idea behind coordinated networks is that the user cannot track who is behind the network. So it's not the transparent process. They are using fake accounts, and also they try to promote their content and appear it more popular than it really is. This contradicts with rules and policies of Facebook. And Facebook has a team who is working and investigating this type of activity on Facebook, and then they are removing the whole network. So almost every month, in the beginning of month, Facebook publishes reports and press releases about the networks in different countries and certain countries. So this is a bit outdated because in Georgia, for instance, we had several Facebook takedowns. And the first one was in 2019, and this network was directly attributed to Georgian Dream ruling party. And that was disaster and shocking for me as well, because the attribution is really important when we are doing this type of investigation. And Georgia was listed among authoritarian or partly authoritarian regimes that were attributed by Facebook behind the network. So that was very, very bad for Georgia's democracy. But I want to talk about, like, how we're doing that. And this is also open source. Everything is given on Facebook itself. So this is investigating Facebook using Facebook and not some extra tools. There was Graph Tips search tool back, I don't know, several years ago, and that allowed us to monitor and analyze the profile, and not only one profile, but several profiles and connections of these profiles. So when you put the link and copied the link into that search engine, it gave you sorted information about the likes of that person back, I don't know, 5 years ago, what this person liked, or the tagged photos or everything. And then due to personal information stuff, because you cannot really profile person, do the profiling of the person, even if it's public information, that tool was, I don't know, dead, like it died, and it was really disaster for investigative researchers. And now we are left with information that is given within Facebook to identify the networks on Facebook. So like the whole idea is this one. We are tracking the transparency section of Facebook page, and it is given below the About section. And that gives you information about the creation date of the Facebook page, and in the groups, in the case of groups as well, the location, the primary country location the page is managed from. You do not track the actual users who are behind the Facebook page, but you can track the country, and that sometimes is really interesting information, and the number of the administrators as well. So it's like Georgia, and then in brackets 4, for instance. That means that this page has 4 administrators, and all of them are based in Georgia. Name changes, history of name changes. That is also a really important section when we're tracking Facebook pages, because we've seen some of the cases when, for instance, there was a page linked with the Georgian March. This is far-right pro-Kremlin political party in Georgia. And the name of the page was Best Shoes Fabric. And the images on this page was of sneakers. And you had impression that this was online shopping Facebook page. But actually it indicated in About section, the linked website was official website of Georgian March. So like initially you're not really able to track this Facebook page with or link with Georgian March, but additional information given in these sections then allows you to identify the real connection and who is behind that type of Facebook page. So sometimes we might see that It's named after, I don't know, let's defeat COVID-19 in Georgia. And we've seen lots of inauthentic pages and groups who capitalized on panic around COVID information because people were searching about the information about COVID. They were like, I don't know, joining some of the groups. And in fact, those groups were dedicated to some of the political parties, and they spread political agenda in those groups. And when the page or the group changes its purpose, it is easily trackable from the history of the name changes. So it's there. This is part of the Facebook's transparency policy. And you see what was the original name and when the name was changed as well. The timestamps are also really important because then you can track what was going on politically on that date. So for instance, if we see like dozens of pages changing names ahead of elections or something like that, then we see that there is some of the interesting political agenda. There might be some of the ads on the Facebook page, and you can go to ads library and track the strategic messages of the Facebook page, because if they are paying money to promote the message, then it's interesting to like understand what's the message they are promoting. And also linked groups. This is also there on Facebook. And when you identify the groups, then you see the types, the size of the networks and coordination, because when they say the pages have this type of inauthentic names, and then they are managing the groups again with inauthentic names, then there is some sign of inauthenticity and coordination. So coordination is not a problem for Facebook, of course, because we are sharing the information about the DataFest in coordination, but if we're doing that inauthentical, then that's a problem. And also the content, of course, that's really important to understand whether we see the identical or duplicate content. That also helps us to identify the coordination between the pages or groups, and just to track the content, what's going on those type of pages, what are the political messages, what are the disinformation messages, etc. So there was one interesting case in Georgia. Let me check time. Yes, we have time. It was several years ago. Inauthentic network was shut down in Georgia, and what they did, so they used fake accounts, of course. They impersonated some health authorities and opposition political leaders. They also managed groups and pages, and of course they tried to appear their content more popular than it really was. They also ran some of the pages designed to look as user profiles. And that might be the method to avoid detection and monitoring. But now, like recently, we found another network, like a week or 2 weeks ago. There was the method that was like vice versa method, because technically those accounts were user accounts, but the names were of pages, like very general names. And that is really the method to avoid monitoring, because Facebook monitoring programs cannot really track user accounts. So you just need to have a luck and identify those profiles. For instance, we're using CrowdTangle. That is not really very open source because you need to have access to full program, but you cannot post the link and track the content of user profiles, even if their content is public. And then interesting feature there was that these pages posed as independent news outlets. So they partly camouflaged themselves as entertaining content and partly as genuine media outlets. So this person was behind this whole network, Qoqaqandiashvili, and Georgian audience knows him, I'm sure. He's a very close person to Georgian ruling party. He was working as public relations advisor for Chancellor of Government of Georgia. Then he left and stayed as a consultant in the same sphere. So he ran the media platform that was called this one, Es Persona, and it's translated as this person, nothing interesting in terms of content. And beyond official Facebook page of Es Persona, they operated multiple pages, duplicated pages with different logos. And these pages also ran this type of groups. So in the linked groups, or there, like you see the section of the groups, this is where you click and identify the groups that are linked to the Facebook page. And like these are in Georgian, but if we translate the names, none of those groups are tracked or linked with this persona or that person who created the whole network. For instance, our generation, it's very general name, right? World News, nothing specific. Happy Society, or Be Happy, or We Are Happy with Our Life, or Here You Can Find Everything, or Madhouse. So like entertaining names or spam type of names, this is how they try to attract audiences. And sometimes these groups have names of very niche interest topics like plants or motorcycle or that kind of stuff. And people think that they're in the groups that are dedicated to the topics they're interested in, but basically, in fact, they are tracked to political parties and political actors. And they also, like when I said that they operated fake media outlets, they not only had the names with the pages, with the names like Georgia Daily or 7 Days or Read Some News Here or Hot News. So the names are somehow tracked to be media outlets, but they also created the websites with the same names. Why? Because it seems to be more genuine. And this is how they tried to deceive audience. And what we did, we checked the timestamps when these pages were created and when the websites were created. And in case of the pages, you see that like the most of them were created on a single day. And this is, again, in page transparency section, what I said like about the page history. Here you see the timestamps. And in every case, you can check the timestamps. And if we see that like dozens of pages were created on the same day, that's suspicious. And you need to pay attention. And then we checked the registration date of the domains. And again, we see that they were created several days before, on the single day, May 12th. So that's also link and analysis of the network. In terms of CrowdTangle, I don't have a screenshot here because it's not an open source, but in case you, in the future, have access, you can put the links you're interested of the Facebook pages and analyze the whole database. And also you can download the historical data. And for instance, if you're exploring the potential coordination between the pages, you can see there in the downloaded data in the CSV files that sometimes there are some of the cross posts and the posts that were posted within a minute. So this means that these pages also have technical coordination. It was not just reshared, but automatically cross-posted from one page to another page. And when we see that these are posted within a minute, that means that somebody, like one person, single authority, I don't know, organization is behind this network and manages this network. I think I'm done with the cases and demonstrating how open source is used in DFRLab's work. And like we also run sessions, detailed sessions about each topic, like geolocation or social networks analysis or, I don't know, website forensics and that kind of stuff. And it's really, really interesting sessions. And it's closed, for fall application it's closed, but in the spring we will open the registration for the sessions as well, and you can join, you can find this one. Digital Sherlocks, and then you can register if you have any interest about the sessions, and they will go in details. Okay, if you have any questions, I'm here for you. Thank you. Oh, we have lots of time.
Thank you, Sopo, so much. So, as usual, we will also be collecting questions from Zoom. So, in case you have any, please feel free to share. Funny fact, though, I don't know, I'm not at all proud of it, but as Persona, we were like, they were kind of media partners of DataFest Tbilisi many, many years ago, but still, so I was like, oh my God, what is happening? But thanks for your work. They are not our media partners anymore. So, do we have any questions?
I had two questions. One is technical and the other one not so technical. on the technical aspect, is there any tool that you can utilize to identify the coordinated behavior in amplifying posts? Like, I know that in Twitter we have tools to see how the network of bots operate. Do we have something like that in Facebook? That's the technical side. And on the other, not a technical side, Facebook has become under a lot of heat in the US and Europe recently. And we always hear about how is it that they impacted the US elections and European elections, but how does that also translate and impact in the case of Georgia, where Facebook is monopolized basically?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. So about the first one, we are using, as I said, CrowdTangle, and you can have access to Facebook API and download the data and analyze in Python and other programs, but I don't really have experience of doing that. But in the DFRLab team, we have tech people who are doing that type of investigations, and they're retrieving the keywords, for instance, or if the content is duplicated, or the rapid link sharing and the information, the websites they're technically in coordination sharing from, and API helps in that regard, but it's not very, very helpful because it's not an open API. So in terms of Twitter, it's easily accessible and you can have access to that information, but Facebook is a bit complicated. And we are using CoreNet as well, but again, I don't have experience of doing that, so I'm not the best person to answer your technical questions. About the Facebook, yeah, like our partnership is becoming a bit like complicated in terms of accessing information, and CrowdTangle was also under attack, and there was really scandal around CrowdTangle that not all information should be accessible for researchers, but then there was another team saying that we have to have this open policy that everyone who has access to CrowdTangle should have access to all information there. There was some issues about like how open should it be about the malign actors, like whether researchers are able to understand the whole tactics and methods, how we're amplifying the content and how they are using Facebook. But of course, like I'm pro open information because we need that for investigations. In terms of Georgia, if we translate that into practice, it was not really that much translated into practice in Georgian political context because mostly the amplification on Facebook we see from political parties. There was one case about the opposition party as well, and mostly pro-Kremlin political parties and far-right political parties. So in terms of that relations, that scandals that are around Facebook on international level are not really reflecting the workflow, how we're working on Facebook, with Facebook in Georgian context. So it did not really affect that much, but for other units that we are working around the globe, it had some of the effect, but not in Georgian case.
Can you tell us a little bit more on your current project that you are working on in the context of maybe Georgia or like the region in general?
You mean Georgia Information Integrity Program?
Yes.
Okay, so this is a USAID-funded program, 5-year-long counter disinformation program in Georgia. So that comprises of many units, maybe, because like there is a team who is working on public opinion polls, and that is like our own public opinion polls to understand how the disinformation messages land to the audience and how that changes over time as well, and also track demographics of the target audiences. Like we track the messages, we test the messages, disinformation messages, and then those audience who are vulnerable to those disinformation messages to understand what's like worldview in general, like the language they speak or foreign languages they know or information sources they track information from, etc. Then there is another unit within this program that we are calling sprints, or these are like workshop style of meetings when we identify the vulnerable topic that are really very sensitive to the audience, then work with many stakeholders around that topic to somehow resolve that issue. And then there is this information unit, and I know more about that because I'm working in that unit, what we're doing is that we're not really tracking disinformation narratives. In Georgia, we already know what are the disinformation narratives, and disinformation is really well researched in Georgia, but there are some of the sectors that we have the gap of the knowledge. So we have the database that helps us to identify the links. This is network analysis program that is built manually. And we collect information about every actor, every malign actor, and not only coming from Russia, but domestic homegrown disinformation actors as well. And the main idea behind this database is to understand how these actors are interlinked with each other. So how that started was that I started to collect all information and research and publication that was available in Georgian context about Georgia disinformation. And then we saw that like media is very well known. Everyone is talking about media, but we did not have much information about energy, for instance, and other interesting sectors, strategic sectors that might be vulnerable towards Russian influence. So we started to fill that information, started to promote some investigations and help our partners and support our partners with finances as well, and capacity building trainings also, to say that like, guys, like we know much about media, but we do not know about energy, so we need to investigate the energy sector, and here is money, and you investigate the energy, and then we're building this map. So this is called Georgia Disinformation Ecosystem Map, that is somehow a live resource because it's very frequently updated, and you can track all the connections there. And it's really interesting. So it helps you to identify the gaps and also like to somehow manage the process and your communication and strategy while countering disinformation. Unfortunately, it's not open source. It's internal for the Zinc also and our coalition partners. And this is basically what I'm doing in that program. Tracking links and connections between actors.
Thank you, Sopo, for mentioning that, because on 9th of December, we will have Zinc Network represented at here. So they will be talking, so this is a really great spoiler alert kind of thing, but we will have the showcase and we'll go in depth on that regard as well. We have several...
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for presenting this topic. I have kind of development question. Could you describe the life cycle of fake accounts and bots? For instance, a few years ago, now, and what do you think of the future? We're going to be able to differ it from real people, for instance? And
yeah, good question. So when I started to work on trolls, it was the topic that was discussed only in professional circles. So when I was doing some media literacy and capacity trainings with different audiences, I had to explain what the troll is, what the fake account is. It was like back several years ago. But now when I go to the audiences, everyone knows what the troll is. Everyone acknowledges that the problem, that the troll exists. They might struggle with identifying the troll, but the information that this type of activity exists on social networks, this is already a good step forward, that you increase the awareness about that type of activity in society. But it's not like only our result of our job and trainings, because there is very popular TV show in Georgia that everyone watches, and some of the series were dedicated how political actors were using and amplifying the trolls and to amplify their narratives, and this from pop culture that became more people got to know that information. So there were two types of fake accounts. So ones that are dedicated to comment sections, and they are posting in the comments, and they're not really paying much attention on or spread resource on building their own profiles. So even if you track those down, and when you identify that this is the troll, that my experience showed that when we were publishing the articles that this one is troll and that one is troll, they were deactivating themselves before the Facebook takedowns. So this is like life cycles. They are working, they're posting in the comments, they're trying to shift focus from the topics and discussions, and that also, this is threat to democracy as well. But when you identify them, then they are deleting themselves. There was always critical question, like what's the point in spending so much resources in identifying trolls, because they have like dozens of trolls, like the one person has dozens of trolls. But this is a step backwards for them, because they need to build again another user, build the trust for the audience, start to comment in the comment section, etc. So again, they can recreate other users, but they need to spend resources as well. And now we are a step forward. And then there are another types of trolls, in Georgian context, of course, who are trying to build the audience and build their profiles, so they create illusion that they are real and genuine accounts. And these are the trolls who are using that type of images, stolen images from real persons or artificially generated images. In Georgia, there was one political blogger, and he was very often cited by online news media outlets. He was like a respondent for online news media outlets, and he was discrediting, of course, like that's the formula, how you do the trolling in Georgia. You should discredit NGOs, you should discredit the activists, political opposition, and media, like critical media. And this was the content he was sharing. And then we found that that person did not really exist. Nobody has seen him. The online media never called him. They were just copying the Facebook posts of him and giving more audience to his, I don't know, information that he posted. Because when that information goes to media, that's still traditional, formal institution, people trust more media than Facebook accounts. And that was the problem with Georgian online media outlets as well. And then we said that, guys, this is AI-generated image. That type of image is what we saw on the screen. And when we exposed him, he deleted his blog. He tried to somehow fight back that, like, I will sue you, I will go to the court, I'm the real person. Okay, go ahead. Like, because he does not really exist. That name and surname does not exist. So exposing is really very important, because this is how their life cycle ends, because they're either Facebook is deactivating them and Facebook tracks the whole network behind one account, or when we expose them, they are not really very, I don't know, successful anymore, because if you do proper communication, then people and audience knows that this person is real, is not real, and they do not really need to spend any more resources, so they just delete their accounts. This is the life cycle. They create, then we expose, and then they delete themselves. Sorry?
The continuation, I would like to
the continuation, yeah. Like what's going in the future. Okay, like I see that some of the, for instance, deep fakes or again AI images are used in other contexts for more complicated audiences maybe, but in Georgia it's really very cheap to produce this information. So one person talks something not really fact-based, or I don't know, some silly stuff, and then the video is posted on Facebook, then it is distributed, and maybe some inauthentic network is also amplifies that information, and people start to believe that information. So it's really easy to do this information in Georgia. And there has never been the need of using high technologies for spreading disinformation in Georgia. So if we see the use of technologies, of AI images, of deepfakes in other countries, and also we should say that deepfakes are not that widely used in disinformation sphere, but that has some resources to be used in that topic, we might see that kind of development of the accounts here. But what we saw, for instance, Altinfo, this is far-right platform. They were behind mobilizing violence on July 5th. I don't know if you know that what happened. March of Dignity should be happen on July 5th. Tbilisi Pride announced that that would be Pride Week. And like the whole month, these far-right actors mobilized supporters to attack LGBT activists. And so this march never happened. They attacked journalists, and that was really very black day for Georgian democracy and Georgia's history. And now recently, like 2 weeks ago, they established political party. But what's interesting is that like for several years, we have identified their inauthentic networks, and Facebook took down those networks, and they like returned on Facebook and again and again. So if we track the development of their networks, that's also interesting how they, I don't know, play around the Facebook rules and again come back to Facebook. This is what I said, that they're not creating Facebook pages anymore or Facebook groups. They are creating fictitious personas or user profiles that are hard to track down, because you can track the pages and public information that is given on Facebook using some of the tools, but while tracking users, you need this manual work. That's like, it's huge resources are needed to track user profiles. And like when you track one user profile, it's nothing. You need to identify the whole network. So this is like in practice how they developed their methods to come back on Facebook. But in future, we might see that in Georgian audience, in Georgian context, we also see the use of technologies to spread disinformation.
Considering that, have you and I guess other organizations such as Myth Detector we were speaking before, have you ever considered also that maybe having to be a little more confidential on how you do the analysis, because maybe they are are they learning from what we are doing, or is it that they are just changing their practices?
So what we are learning from them changing the practices?
No, the fact that they are learning from what we are doing, because they are changing from pages because we cannot follow it in CrowdTangle. So is given the fact that they are learning from us, have you ever is there a feeling of maybe we have to become more confidential on how we do counter disinformation operations?
Yeah. So the main point here is that like how we are communicating with the audiences, because like our work always like frequently stays in professional circles, and we might not communicate with wider audiences properly. In terms of tech, we are restricted because we have our ethics. We know that, for instance, tracking user profile and profiling the person is not okay. And we are following those ethical rules. But those actors, those malign actors, are not following those rules. Or, for instance, if I'm writing the research, I know the rules and starters, how should I write the information? I need to provide some links so you are able to track that information and the primary sources as well. So I'm spending much resources on how to do the investigation properly and ethically. And this is why we're a bit like step backwards than they are, because they're not following those rules. They do not care about the rules. And also like they know how to reach wider audiences better than us. So that's how we should learn the lesson, because for instance, these Altinfo guys and far-right actors, they are targeting younger audiences and they are becoming attractive for younger audiences. So why we are not attractive for younger audiences? So we should analyze their communication strategies in depth, and then we should follow or somehow like try to hijack those target audiences themselves. It's really hard to do because NGOs or activists or I don't know, some certain people cannot do that alone. We need some formal resources and government doing something and fighting together with us. We need whole of society approach. This is what we are calling that. Government, private sector, NGOs, research, academia, and every sector of the society is fighting for like disinformation. But for Georgian context, it's really very hard to do because like when I started to work as disinformation researcher and fact checker, I was tracking disinformation coming from Russia and Kremlin originating disinformation. And then through years, I saw that the same methods were used by Georgian government against me and the type of the people, I mean, researchers and the activists and critical voices. So how can the government be the partner when they are using and duplicating the Kremlin methods to fight their opponents? So it's really hard job to do, but we like the first step is that we should recognize and acknowledge our restrictions and what we're not doing well, and then somehow try to do that, but it's hard.
So we have another question from Slack.
Yeah.
Is TikTok target of disinformation as well? How intense is it there? And do we have any tools for tracking fake accounts or collecting data?
Yeah, that's really very good question. And ahead of July the 5th, we tried to analyze this online disinformation mobilization activities. And we saw some separate posts and videos on TikTok. But this is not the major things researchers are doing here, because still Facebook, the major attention is paid to Facebook, and that's also like lessons learned thing for us, but because like it is easier for us to do Facebook analysis because we know how to do Facebook analysis, but we do not really know how to do proper TikTok or newly emerging social media platforms analysis, because the programs are also restricted, and there are some emerging programs to monitor TikTok, but they are not really very actively used in Georgia, because like it was not even mapped. We do not know the prices or the resources or capabilities of those programs. So manually we tracked that there were some disinformation spread around LGBT sentiments in Georgia on TikTok, and they were targeting younger audiences to mobilize people. But again, this is manual work. This is done partially, but we are in like doing, these are the baby steps here. The monitoring of other social media platforms in Georgia, this is a very, very novel thing. So if you know something, or if you have any experience for local audiences, local researchers, that would be really very helpful if you share that information. We're trying to do some stuff, but it's new.
Thank you. We have another question from online audience. Meanwhile, did I miss any hand? No, right? Okay, so another question is like, and you kind of partially covered when you talked about Russia and Georgia, but is there a similarity, like similar narratives of disinformation in countries? For instance, is there similar narratives of post-Soviet countries or in worldwide? Like, what is your observation?
Yeah, that's really a very interesting question. So we can say that the major playbook is similar. So how Russia is working and how they're targeting the audiences they're interested in. They're trying to find some vulnerabilities within the societies, right? This disinformation messages are not coming from here. They should land to that audience. There should be sentiments or some, I don't know, crisis or polarization around those topics in societies. So they are picking this up, then capitalizing on these vulnerabilities, and then expanding their disinformation messages and narratives and try to polarize the society more and more. So that specific disinformation narratives might vary from country to country, or from, I don't know, there are some of the major historical grievances, for instance, between the countries. For instance, we have in Georgia a major Armenian minority, and they are trying to spread anti-Turkish narratives in specific region where Armenians live in Georgia. So because of the history of genocide and vulnerabilities, the historical grievances between Armenia and Ottoman Empire, and they are trying to capitalize more and more on that. This happened in history, of course, but this is trauma for Armenian society, and there are some general disinformation messages targeting the whole Georgia as a country, but then there are some specific niche narratives targeting specific audiences and narratives. So the major strategy is similar, and when you're tracking this information in other countries, somehow you can predict what might be the next steps of Kremlin disinformation in certain countries, but there might be some interesting and novel things for you as well to identify their niche-specific target audiences and very specific disinformation narratives.
Thank you. And who do you think are the most vulnerable target audience for disinformation? Like, is there a possibility to say like young people, older generation, like,
yeah.
Can you?
So the public opinion polls in Georgia for years have shown that ethnic minorities are the most vulnerable towards Russian disinformation, and how that can be measured. So in public opinion polls that is conducted by NDI, National Democratic Institute, they are tracking the support and the percentage of support from the society towards like EU or NATO. So for years that has been stable. There are some of the fluctuations, but not major. And then they are going deeper into the society. So those persons who do not support Georgia's EU or NATO aspirations and integrations to the Western institutions are mostly based in regions and are ethnic minorities. And then if we compare the information about their information sources, they're mostly receiving information from Russian TV channels, and then there might we see the logical connections, how they are becoming target audience of Kremlin disinformation. Then of course, then the second question is what the government is doing for their inclusion, and what's the communication strategy with the audiences, and how they are participating in Georgian political life, so they are feeling that they are part of this society and not the I don't know, the Russian or Russian language information environment. But that's totally different topic and really hard, and always organizations are criticizing government about that. But yeah, basically these are the audiences that can be measured. But also we should say that pro-Kremlin disinformation does not solely spread or disseminated in Georgia through Russian sources. There are Georgian proxy sources that spread disinformation, and sometimes there are major debates whether to ban some of the disinformation outlets. But beyond talking about the freedom of speech or the risks to democracy and freedom of expression in this type of country where we do not have strong institutions and that can be used to fight or silence some critical voices here in Georgia, there is an issue also that, okay, you can ban the TV or something like that, but that will be only political statement, how government responds to this information, because that message will spread across the platforms, and we've seen that TV is not only like the sole source of information in any country, I would say.
Thank you. Of course, there's one thing how government reacts on that information, but it's really valuable for us. Like you mentioned, Georgian case, right? So it's really valuable for us, organization representatives, like activists, etc., and communication specialists even, because I think in the audience there are lots of them, lots of us, and it's also good to target those people. And maybe if there is a gap from governmental side, we could be the one to fill out those gaps. I have one last question from the audience, like from the online audience, if nothing changes. So we've talked about TikTok, and you mentioned that it's a bit new. So you are not like, this is something a bit new for you. But I think like Facebook and like you are working with Facebook and Twitter, right? Official representatives of Facebook and Twitter. Is there any work that is being happening for TikTok? Like, are you in touch with them? Like, is there anything planning, because it's new, but it's also really fastly emerging?
Yeah, okay, the direct question is no. But we're not official representatives of Facebook or Twitter. We have partnership with only Facebook, not with Twitter. And the partnership looks like we are giving them information if we identify some inauthentic networks ourselves. And we had several cases, and then Facebook confirmed inauthenticity. They did some their additional investigation and then took the network down. Or the process is vice versa. When they identify the network, they are sharing that information, the sets according to the countries with us. And if we are interested in that country, specific country, then we are doing our own research of the content and the network as well. So this is how the partnership looks like with Facebook, and it does not really mean that they will share everything with us. And if we have some critical issues, or if we want some additional access to additional data, we will have that access, and that this dialogue is not really easy thing to produce. We're not having that type of partnership with Twitter, and we're not in the process of having conversation with TikTok. Not that I'm aware of. I'm not sure about like DC headquarters, but I know that there is no that type of conversation.
Okay, thank you so much. I feel like there are no more questions. Correct me if I'm wrong. So I think we can wrap up this session. Thank you so much, Sopo.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.